What's going on? Today I would like to talk a little bit about the nutritional matrix, as I call it. This is probably going to be the start of a little bit of a series because the nutritional matrix is by far not the only matrix, quote unquote, that we see nowadays. A couple of wheels, so to say, have emerged on this society, if you want to call it like that. By far not everywhere in the world, by the way. There's societies which are already very, very deep down into the matrixy like realm, I would say, where their perception of reality and factual reality are already very far apart, are already very much different from each other. Whereas on other places on Earth, the more natural, the more rural, the more tribal the more tribal societies we're looking at, we see that they are completely free still of these, this deception, this discrepancy between their, perception of reality and actual reality. So what I really want to try to do with this series is basically to point at a couple of things that make up these matrices and how they affect the way we live today and also our health, and how they lead in the end, because that's what they do finally, to a progressive degeneration of humankind. Simply because if you are still a natural construct, a natural organism, but do not follow nature's laws, you are going to disintegrate quicker and sooner than if you do not follow than if you would follow nature's laws. That's simply how it is, because nature values, nature rewards a lifestyle that is implicated for you as an organism. We all have different purposes on this planet, on this in this ecological network, so to say. And if we act against those purposes, it's only natural that we are not rewarded as much as if we would work for these purposes. I hope that makes sense. So anyway, so much on the introductional terms, I would say. Let's start with the nutritional matrix. Now, I want to essentially point out a couple of things that have changed over the last couple of years, essentially, especially the last 100 years or so, and then also especially the last 2,000 years and the last 10,000 years. Because before that, there hasn't been really a huge area on this planet where we diverged so much from our nature that it would be, worthy of pointing out, which is in and of itself a quite interesting fact when you think about it, because 100,000 years ago, things have always been the same, and previous generations just lived exactly the same as following generations for literally thousands of years. It has been the same. So you could basically imagine that your life was pretty similar to that of your granddad, to that of your grandchild. That's pretty interesting, because when you think about the situation that we are in today, we know that our lives of these present humans here that you're watching this on the internet is going to be a hell lot of different than the lives of humans living in 100 years, as our lives are a hell lot of different than those of humans who lived 100 years ago. Okay, so we can see that the changing factor on this earth inside of human society is blown up to an artificially super high degree, and that in and of itself is quite an interesting fact to think about, I would say. But okay, let's get into the nutritional matrix. First of all, we have to realize that in order for this to happen generally, there's a couple of theories why our perception of reality and actual reality diverge from each other. Some think it is a very important tool of the elite, to keep the slaves in the slave mode and, make them work for them. And it could be true to some degree, although I personally think that is actually a lot simpler. The actual explanation is a lot simpler than that. I would say all of these matrices, these modern matrices, if you want to call them like that, they essentially come about because of profit, of profitability. It is simply more profitable to act that way than acting without that way. And this is the main driver of the emerging of these matrices essentially is money. Okay, so what we see in the nutritional matrix is, for example, that, as I've talked about in my last video where I talked about if you can be fat and healthy at the same time, vegetable oils, for example, are a lot cheaper to produce per calorie than animal oils, than animal fats. These are actually not oils, they are fats because they are solid at room temperature. But anyway, so vegetable oils are cheaper to produce than animal fats. Sugar is cheaper than molasses, and molasses is cheaper than beet juice. And beet juice paradoxically is cheaper than whole beets because of shelf life. Okay, this is something that is very important to calculate into the profitability of a product, its shelf life. And this of course applies to nutritional goods, to food, just as much as to any other product, as much as to a car and stuff like that. A car has of course a very high shelf life when you don't touch it, when you don't use it. Of course, if you use it, you don't want its lifetime, the lifetime of a car, to be super high, because then you can sell less cars, right? If you get your cars out and they never get destroyed, you don't sell a lot of cars. So this is why we also have a sort of technological matrix going on here today, where we think that the more modern a product is, the better it is actually, which is not true. But that's for another episode, I guess. So we see that if something affects shelf life to the positive, whatever that may be, regardless whether that's beneficial for your health or not, it is probably going to be rewarded a lot by this modern society because it is more profitable. However, it's not going to be rewarded by nature, so you're going to get unhealthy by consuming that stuff. Grains are cheaper than animal products just because of the same reason. A grain calorie is a lot cheaper to produce than an animal calorie. Its shelf life is also a lot greater when you process it appropriately, via refining, getting the white flour out. Pasteurization is cheaper than raw milk, and many other raw juices for that matter, because you can increase shelf life like that. Although we know actually that when you just basically leave raw milk out, then it becomes sour milk, and at some point it's becoming cheese and stuff like that. But all these things are not very predictable and not very calculatable, so to say, from a profitable point of view. Also, the consistency of the product will vary a lot, We have cows that get more grass, cows that get less grass, the milk looks a bit different. So there's always this urge of industry to homogenize a product, to satisfy the consistency needs of the population, so to say, and of the laws which dictate whether this product is utilizable for the market and stuff like that. And we haven't even talked about preservatives, like ascorbic acid, quote unquote, that they use nowadays to preserve stuff. But there's much more harmful stuffs that have been used in the past. Then we have salt. We have these special bacon salts. I don't know how they're called. That are used to preserve meats and stuff like that, which all is not very necessary when you think about it. You could also just as well dry age meat in the fridge and not use these preservatives. But again, it would lead to a less consistent product, less shelf life in general, less profit. So what we really see here is that generally the industrialization and globalization of food production makes food cheaper and therefore more profitable compared to like small local farms, that just produce for their local vicinities, for the local population, which is of course also why we see these people dying slowly out, which is why I would encourage you highly, if you hear this, that you support these kind of guys, because these are actually the good guys. Now, I say globalization of food production. We also see that we import bananas from, South America to the Europes, to the North Americas. We see that we harvest oranges in Spain. Then we transport them to Italy for them to become packaged. Then we transport them back to Spain again for them to become juiced. Then we transport them back to like Germany or something for them to become packaged again, and all that kind of stuff, which is obviously from an efficiency point of view completely ridiculous, but from a profitable point of view, obviously profitable, because other than that it wouldn't be done, right? So here we can see the power that this profitability really has on our actions nowadays. And this is what creates these matrices. The more profitable something is, the more something will prevail in this capitalistic society that we have nowadays. What they have to do now is they have to somehow find a compromise between the fact that these processes are completely ridiculous, not only from an efficiency point of view, but also from a health point of view, because obviously the more you consume these foods, these processed foods, these high shelf life foods, these essentially dead foods, because you have to kill that stuff for it to not go bad, to make it so unpalatable for any other organism that they don't touch it anymore, essentially. How can you sell then something like that? How can you uphold this matrix? So what they have to do is they have to advertise it as healthy, as ecologically sustainable and more ethical and stuff like that, etc. And here we tie into other matrices, which I would call the ecological matrix, the ethical matrix, and maybe the most powerful of them all, the healthcare matrix, okay? Which, the whole healthcare sector is also just a sector that has to work on a profitable level, okay? So these things do not really have your health. Health is not really their goal, okay? First goal is to be profitable. And then we see where that leads to. So, again, they have to make these things look healthy. They have to advertise them as healthy. This is why, for example, vegetable oils could completely overrun the traditional cooking methods of using animal fats for cooking, using lard, using beef, tallow, and all that stuff. All very stable fats that are actually heatable to some degree and do not, break down super quickly as these vegetable oils do, because they contain so high amounts of unsaturated fatty acids, which tend to flip over into trans fats when you heat them and put pressure on them and stuff like that. So what they did was they simply advertised these new oils as much healthier than the traditional fats to use. And this is how essentially they found their way into modern households. And if you go back enough in time, like your grandparents or stuff like that, they will tell you of a time where they basically only used animal fats for cooking, because these vegetable oils actually have only emerged during the last 100 years, except for a few exceptions, like olive oil, for example. I mean, olive oil is on this planet for quite some time already, like for 2,000 years or something like that, where it emerged in the Mediterranean. But this oil, quote unquote, back then, it was basically olive juice, okay? It was not as highly filtered as today. It was not extracted with heat. It was not so refined. The product of today, again, is already a lot more refined, which it has to be, because again, it has to have longer shelf life. It has to be homogenized so that it is more, more appealing to the consumer, and all this kind of stuff. So we have to view these things in the context of time. Back then, this vegetable juice, this olive juice, was probably not so unhealthy. Okay. Now today, it is of course different, yet again, because of profitability. It has to be profitable. This is also the main mechanism that helps, these diet trends to emerge. If something is more profitable, it's going to be trendy. It's going to be made trendy with a lot of propaganda, with a lot of advertising. Then a lot of people try this stuff. They give quote unquote positive reviews because they get paid for that. And this is how these trends emerge, essentially out of the nothing. We see this with the vegan diet very nicely, okay? The vegan diet has experienced a massive explosion over the last couple of decades, like 1 or 2 decades or so. So this is a very recent phenomenon and a very recent experiment, actually. And we see it all over social media. We see the celebrities, going vegan and making a big story about it. And we can see that there is a push towards that. Also, from the medical industry, from the healthcare industry, because they tell you that being vegan is more healthy. It helps your atherosclerosis. You're not gonna be so fat. You're not gonna be diabetic and all that kind of stuff. Essentially because vegan foods in the end are simply very cheap to produce per calorie, and still quite easily sold for quite an expensive price. So, this is extremely useful for profit. I mean, these modern mock meats, for example, where they use something extremely cheap like wheat and soy to produce something that resembles meat with a bit of salt and, flavor enhancers and stuff like that. This is extremely profitable because you can sell it at a very high price, basically at the same price almost like real meat, but you can produce it from much cheaper goods. And this is of course something that almost had to come about in a system like the modern one that we live today. And I'm not sure what came first, the ethical and ecological thinking that comes with veganism, and then veganism came about with a few people. Then the industry saw, oh, look at that, these people are extremely cheap to feed and give us a lot of money for it. And then they jumped on the bandwagon and made a little bit of a push forward. Or if it was actually the other way around, if certain industries started this trend somehow on purpose, with a lot of advertisement and a lot of these documentaries, quote unquote, that try to push people into this certain direction. Now again, this is only a very local phenomenon. We see this in the very most advanced, quote unquote, societies, the first world countries, so to say. In third world countries, you won't have that bias. In third world countries, everybody knows if they can get their hands on meat, if they can get their hands on animal products, on these high quality foods, and also they have a lot of traditional recipes for that stuff, always also including some sort of it raw, in the raw state. They will prize these foods. They will not say, "Oh my God, no, I'm not. I don't want to have heart disease. I'm not touching that stuff." No. If they can get their hands on it, they are going to be very happy. The problem there is that they don't have the resources to grow these foods, So we can see here we also have to view this topic in a local context. We have to view it in a geographical context as well. So these are my thoughts on the nutritional matrix again. Simply think about what is cheapest to produce, what is the most profitable, and don't necessarily think so much about whether this industry wants to do anything good to you, wants you to be healthy and stuff like that, because we left this wagon, we left this train a long, long time ago, okay? Today we are really on a road to degeneration, essentially. I can't find any other words for it. And the main driving factor because of that is profitability. Everything has to be profitable, and if it is profitable, it will prevail. Doesn't matter whether it's extremely unhealthy, whether it's extremely inefficient, whether it's extremely stupid. As long as it's profitable, no problem. So think about that in the context of foods. Just take a look at supermarkets. What do you find in your modern supermarket? Think about what is the hardest to find in a modern supermarket, and you will pretty much get a quick assessment of what are the things that you probably should eat. And don't forget to support your local farmers, because these guys are suffering the most out of this modern development. All right, that's it. Bye.